You're listening to Tabletop Arcanum, a podcast dedicated to learning and exploring the hobby of tabletop gaming. Your hosts are Justin Taylor and Richard Geese, so sit back and relax as we talk, discuss, and joke our way through the hobby we love so much. Imagine you can control the forces of a noble family, guild, religious order, or barren planet, which is the only source of the most valuable substance in the known universe. Imagine you can rewrite the script for one of the most famous science fiction books of all time. In Dune, you become a leader of one of the 6 great factions, and each wishes to control the most valuable resource in the world, melange, a mysterious spice only found at great cost on the planet Dune. As Duke Leto Atreides, all fades before melange. A handful of spice will buy a home in Tupeli. It cannot be manufactured. It must be mined on Arrakis. It is unique and has true geriatric properties. And without melange, space travel would be impossible. Only by ingesting the addictive drug can the skilled steersman continue to experience visions of the future, enabling them to plot a safe path through hyperspace. Who will control Dune? Become one of the characters or forces of the book, and you decide. Welcome to Tabletop Arcanum. This is Justin, and I'm bringing you a review of Dune from Gale Force 9. This is going to be now known as Dune Classic, as this is the updated, but mostly left alone version from 40 years ago. It has a 2 to 6 player count, plays in over 2 hours plus, depending on how many players and how long you take, and is an MSRP of $50. I first want to mention that this is going to be one of 3 reviews I'm doing on the Gale Force 9 Dunes, so take a look at this is for Dune Classic. We will also have a review for the new streamlined version of Dune, Conquest and Diplomacy, as well as a comparison between Classic and New Dune. Let's look at the first impressions of Dune Classic. The game box is one of the things I love one the most because it has that very classic sci-fi book art cover with the sandworm and the Fremen on it, and it just screams Arrakis to me, and I love it for that. The game box is a relatively medium-sized game box, and while they do have a insert in the box to start with, there's a lot of loose tokens with spice tokens and faction tokens, so it can get jostled and messy pretty quickly on the inside as far as that storage solution goes. There are some options out there, like Folded Space makes one that contains everything in a little bit neater sense. And there is also an expansion available for $20, which is the Ixian and Telexu factions, which will add 2 additional factions to your game. Does not increase the player count, but does allow you to play a 6-player game with 8 potential factions. My other big first impression on Dune Classic is it does feel like it is an old mechanics game. It has a very slow pace to the game. There isn't a lot going on. You're walking through your phases, you're walking through your area control mechanics very slowly. And while the factions are asymmetrical, they are heavily reliant on each other as far as the economic component of the game. So let's dive into some of those things Dune Classic does well. If you are a fan of the old Dune game and you need a new version of it because either A, your copy is gone, or you never picked it up but played it once and always had that memory of it, this is the game perfectly suited for you in that sense, because it has been relatively untouched. The art is the same art style. They brought in the original designers to make sure any tweaks or updates was more of a patch to the game and not necessarily reworking it, which lends itself to that very old school feeling in play. As you play through the game, you also step through a lot of steps, and they do have very nice markers on the board of what phase you are in, and each round steps through 9 phases, some of which taking longer than others, mostly because some of it is just game mechanics like the storm phase, some of it is actual bidding and revival and movement and then battle. And those tend to be the more longer phases. as you manipulate yourself through. Now, of course, there is also the fact that this is a area control and kind of diplomacy style game. So there is a lot of encouraged table talk, alliances being made, wheels and deals and things of that nature too. All the while, there is trader cards and things of that nature that you have to watch out for. So it does play very well in that genre if you're looking for that war type game that has a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of trader, and can get very swingy very quickly. There's games I've won by almost complete accident, in the sense of I was in the right place, right time, and the other factions blew themselves up, and then I had the win condition by the end of that round. It can get very interesting in that sense. The longer you play it, the more you'll get to feel for the different factions and how they should be more optimized. But overall, Dune Classic offers a old experience in a new box, and the components are nice. The battle wheels are solid. I don't think they're going to fall apart on me anytime soon. The game board itself has a very nice classic look to it. It's a little busy in some of the names of areas, but the defined lines of what sectors are and what territories are is very, very good. One thing Dune Classic does really well, specifically, is capturing the theme of the story of Dune without having you necessarily play through a retelling of the Dune story. So there are some opportunities with Dune Classic, one of which is that slow plotting place, and some of the powers of factions, including like the Bene Gesserit, who get to predict who's going to win on what turn, and if they're right, they win instead. So there's some weird stuff going on with them. The thing I find that is the biggest opportunity in Dune, other than it's just a long game, is that because of how some of the factions interact with each other, with they're on the table or not, really lends the game to being like you do want all 6 players almost every game. 4 players is also good, but the 3 and 5 player count games are really unbalanced in the sense of, depending on what factions are in, there's some interesting mechanics, because if the Spacing Guild is being played, anytime people are summoning forces to Arrakis, they're paying the Spacing Guild. Likewise, playing for the Talaxu revival tanks, the Emperor gets that. So, like, it's difficult in that sense to say which factions need to be on the table at all times because of some of that stuff. And when they added the Talaxu and Ixian expansion, it did alleviate a little bit with the technology markers as far as the economy goes, so it gets a little better, but it's not so much so that I think it is eliminated from the game. Now, the $50 price tag is pretty on par for what you're going to get out of the game. The components and cards are going to be of decent quality. The game board and battle wheels, like I said, are nice. And it gives you quite a bit of gameplay in a $50 box. So I do say I think that is well on its mark. But if you are someone who really digs into either the Dune franchise and wants to explore a high-level strategy game, Dune Classic is going to be a game for you. If you do not like long games, if you do not like fiddly games, if you do not like games that can feel very unbalanced or have a very strong economic learning curve as far as managing your own resources, Dune's going to be a very big challenge for yourself. And I would probably shy you away from Dune Classic into something that is a little bit more in the lines of like an area control game like Rising Sun or Blood Rage. With all that being said, this has been Tabletop Arcanum's review of Dune Classic from Gale Force 9. I appreciate you listening to our episode, and if you want, make sure to check out the other episodes containing to New Dune and the comparison between Dune Classic and New Dune. You can find us on our social media, so that's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming. You've been listening to Tabletop Arcanum, produced by Justin Taylor. This episode is hosted by Justin Taylor. Mixing and editing by Richard Geese. Original theme by Paul Moore and Issac Gilbert. Check the description for this episode's featured background music. You can follow us on most social media platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow, and leave us a review if you would. As always, thanks for listening.